tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Well, let's pivot to this. I mentioned the Freedom Convoy. This is a relic in some ways of an era that many people would rather move on from, an era in which Canadians were segregated along the lines of their vaccine status. And we saw people that were forced out of jobs they had for years, careers they had for years, and people who bravely put on a uniform for this country that were told they were no longer fit to serve Canada in the Canadian Armed Forces because they would not get vaccinated against COVID-19. Well, a story from the Epoch Times this week says that at least some Canadian Armed Forces members have been given waivers that allow them to serve once again if they were previously sanctioned for not getting the COVID vaccine. I wanted to talk about this with Catherine Christensen, a lawyer with Valour Law. Good to talk to you, Catherine. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Good afternoon, Andrew. It's good to be back.
So let's first off start with what's actually changed here. What has the Canadian Armed Forces done?
Well, first of all, the mandate still exists for Canadian Armed Forces members. Certainly, anyone who isn't vaccinated, isn't getting deployed, isn't eligible for promotion. Although I can tell you that some of the people who stood up and managed to stay serving have been promoted, have been on deployments without vaccination. So there's some confusion there. But apparently last fall, they quietly brought in a policy that anyone who would receive a 5F, which is unfit for service release category, strictly because of the COVID mandate, would be allowed to re-enroll and that their applications were welcome. And with the caveat that all 5F reapplications have to be approved by the Chief of Defence Staff. So if you get past the recruiting application piece, the Chief of Defence Staff has final say. Now, I have had clients of mine who were 5F'd approach recruiting centres, certainly since last fall, even as early as last month here in March, and the recruiting centres won't even take their application. But then I got news that directly from a recruiting source that indeed this policy is now back, that they are allowed to apply. Now in Noah's Chartier's article, he points out that they say they've only had one person apply under this relaxed policy. I'm going to question that because I know that for sure that there has been a lot more than one person try to apply and been turned down at the recruiting centers.
Well, and I would also point out here, I mean, while this might be on the surface something that looks quite positive, it doesn't really get to the crux of the issue here, which is that they still have, as you note, the mandate. They've never really apologized for it. They've never done anything to say, hey, we want you back. It seems like they're just dealing with the fact that very few people are wanting to go into the Canadian Armed Forces right now. They've got a recruitment crisis, and I think they're trying to really dance around the real root of the issue here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the real root of the issue is 2 years ago, these same people were told they were unfit for service, that they were not any type of person that the Canadian Armed Forces wanted. And now all of a sudden they're quietly saying, oh no, come back. But come back without necessarily return to your same trade. What about compensation for the time you were off, if you were that qualified, that they want you back? I'm thinking that there's a bit of a conundrum they've got, because if they allow them back, they're defeating their own defense, because we've got lawsuits against them in the courts right now. I'm being able to stand up and say to the court, well, these people were supposedly unfit for service and needed to be permanently released, but now they're okay to come back. It's a bit of a dilemma.
Yeah, and the mandate itself is particularly absurd now, because if you had 2 doses of the COVID vaccine in 2021, your protection is 0 at this point. You have no benefit over someone who did not get vaccinated at this point. I mean, let's even assume there was a benefit in 2021. There isn't now. So the idea of clinging to this mandate just defies any sense of science. And really, I had spoken to one veteran about this a couple of years ago, and he had said that basically it was a compliance issue more than it was a medicine issue. They wanted to weed out the type of person that didn't want it more than there was any strategic or operational reason that it needed to be there.
Exactly. Because let's face it, going into this mandate of general heirs, they'd already gone through working in the nursing homes. So ground zero, where a lot of the deaths took place, we had armed force members there, and not one of them died of COVID from that exposure. So that's pre-vaccine. So then they bring in this vaccination and decimated the Canadian Armed Forces because they lost so many people over it, as well as the woke agenda is also to blame. But they lost a lot of very capable people with exemplary military records just because of the people standing up and saying, no, I'm not going to take it, whether it's against my religion, whether I don't have informed consent, or I want my bodily autonomy, or I have medical reasons that I can't take it. And now that they're desperate, they seem to want them back.
We had you on the show back in June when you had launched, I think it was like a $500 million lawsuit representing hundreds of soldiers at the time about this. And I just wanted to ask, I know these things can take years, but what's the status on that one now?
Well, it's been interesting because we ended up launching a second mass tort after the first one came out and people approached our office. So we're up to about 458. And the two lawsuits, they were only a few months apart from filing, but they've caught up to each other because it's the same Crown lawyer. And they've been playing some games. We sent them our affidavit of documents, which is basically a list of our evidence. And they didn't reply back. And then, so I went into the court to force them to give me a list of their evidence. We've now ended up in case management, and we are before the case management justice next week. And I'm looking forward to hearing the Crown lawyer defend why he can't give me a list of his evidence to defend. Because at this point, they've got no evidence. And the longer they delay, the better it is for me, because now we're well over 300,000 pages of evidence of wrongdoing in the Canadian Armed Forces. So they keep delaying, it's just going to get worse.
I seem to recall, and I might be mixing up the case, but when there was the lawsuit against the federal air travel vaccine mandate, I think the applicants had a similar issue, in that it was like pulling teeth to get the government to provide the evidentiary base it had for this policy. Which, I mean, maybe in politics you can get away with fudging on the evidence, but in a court there is still a process, and if you don't provide evidence for your side of it, you don't actually have a case, do you?
Right. Yeah. So this is exactly what my motion in January, when I filed it, was saying, well, if they don't want to provide me with any evidence to defend, then I want leave of the court to bring a summary judgment. Give us what we asked for, because you can't defend against what we've claimed. They're in a bit of a situation here because CAF is well known for blocking any access to information requests. But we spent 2 years very quietly asking for information through access to information requests. And we collected hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence before they even knew we were bringing a lawsuit, because not one of those requests came out of my office. They were all done by private individuals. So we've kind of gone around, done an end run around them, and we have a lot more evidence, I think, than they realized that we would have going into the lawsuit. So I also,
sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think they're also trying to delay moving into depositions, where I'm going to be calling General Eyre, General Cadieux, General Fortin, Admiral MacDonald. All of those are going to be called to testify under oath. And when General Whalen's court-martial was coming along, the day before they wanted to have Eyre testify at that, they dropped the charges to keep him from having to testify under oath. So,
interesting.
Well,
no, they're terrible. They're terrible with access to information requests. I filed one in January about tampons in washrooms on army bases, because they were all getting removed by soldiers that thought it was nonsense when there's a tampon dispenser in the men's washroom, and that's still taken over 3 months, and I don't have the records yet. So I feel I have to buckle in for a long wait. I'm amazed you got all you did in 2 years, given how DND has been on these requests in the past.
Well, the Information Commissioner has actually been very helpful. She has actually brought lawsuits against the CAF to get documents that we have asked for. The longest access to information requests, I thought it was a long time, but there's some that have been years and years and years, and they still don't have that information, even though they're entitled to it. So we did it. We kind of outmaneuvered the system, which is what my clients hired me to do, because after we tried the injunction, I said, okay, we're going to go deep, we're going to go dark. And I've got all military people who are really good at keeping secrets if they have to, and very smart and very motivated. And they did fantastic work for me.
Yeah, it shows what happens when you alienate a very skilled, dedicated group of people, and they have an axe to grind, time on their hands, and those skills that were previously being deployed for the country and now are being deployed against the bureaucrats in the department.
And keep in mind that these are people who know that the documents exist because they wrote the documents.
Yeah, so they know what to ask for, which is so key. It's not just a fishing expedition, right?
Yeah. They're like, well, here's my chain of command, and I know I had emails with all of these people, and in some cases they still had the email. They brought it with them, so we knew to send in the information request to get it legitimately through the process. And then they'd say, well, no, that doesn't exist, and we go, yes, it does.
Right here. Well, good stuff. Well, wish you well on this, Catherine. Please do keep us posted as you work your way through the system here.
I sure will. And we're also bringing a vaccine injury one. We've got lots of members of the Canadian Armed Forces who were injured from the Moderna vaccine. So that's coming up too.
All right. Well, appreciate that very much. Catherine Christensen from Valour Law out in Alberta. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Take care, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.